Hi, welcome to Sidewalk Talk. I'm Steve Fortunato. We use this platform to tell stories of inspiration, information, and education. Today's story is it's a sad story, yet at the same time, it's an inspiring story. Um, let's just get right to it. Our guest on Sidewalk Talk today is Leng. Leng, thanks for joining us. Thanks for giving us the time. And I know in the preview when we talked earlier, your story. I appreciate your willingness to tell the story, your story, and your parents' story. So thanks for being here.
I appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Sure. As I said, the story is sad, and it's not just your story. It's the story of millions of people in Cambodia. I, uh, I advise anybody to watch a movie. It was made in 1984 called The Killing Fields. And it's the story, the escape of Dirth, I think it's Dirth Pran or Pran,
Death
right?
Prawn, yeah.
And it is, it's not conceivable what happened in Cambodia. And maybe we can talk a little bit about the situation. I know for your parents, your mom, Deanie, there's an article in the Buffalo News back in 1988, and it shows a picture of your mother at a wedding. You weren't born yet.
hmm
And there's 13 people in that picture. 12 of them were murdered. She's the only one that survived. And it it is what happened in Cambodia. It's almost, I mean, I don't know how many millions of people were just slaughtered. I think there's a quote from your father, Leng, in this article. He said they just used to kill people like they were mosquitoes. So set the tone for us. You were born in Cambodia,
hmm
came over when your parents were one of the fortunate ones to escape, and they eventually ended up in Buffalo, New York, where you are now. But set the stage for us. What was going on in Cambodia in the 70s?
So Cambodia's story is one that I think happens over and over, as if you will, from history. Small country, uh, you know, very much dependent on very basic products for their economy to function, and Cambodia is trying at the time to avoid what was escalating in the countries next door in Vietnam. So the Vietnam conflict is occurring, and it's starting to destabilize the region. And Cambodia, knowing that they don't have the political capital or military or economic ability to really be a power player, they're trying to stay neutral in all of it. And what ends up happening, though, is that the North Vietnamese, during the Vietnam conflict, are taking advantage of this situation, crossing into Cambodia, taking sanctuary there, then crossing over into the South, conducting attacks on the United States, military that is there, as well as the South Vietnamese. And it's continuing to escalate. As the war isn't going well, things are just getting, more dire by the day. And sort of infamously, was the time that President Nixon and his staff ordered B-52 bombings of some suspected North Vietnamese sanctuaries in Cambodia. They dropped what was estimated to be, more than the payloads that were dropped in all of World War II was dropped on Cambodia from the B-52 carpet bombings. Which is of course decimating the Cambodian countryside, which is now the ripple effect is you're getting people to really, feel like they need to join this movement, which is started by the Cambodian communist group, the Khmer Rouge, and that's what
That
starts
that was a
the
bad group.
war.
That that
Yes.
that that's the group that really it was almost, what was the guy's name, the
Uh,
original, the
Pol
leader?
Pot.
What's
Yeah,
his name?
Pol Pot. He's sort of that mastermind, if you will, behind the Khmer Rouge movement, and he's gathering disenfranchised people from the countryside, to start this revolution. The revolution is intended to, overturn the corruptness of what they, would characterize as, the elites, those that were educated, wealthy, etc. Which is, again, as I said before, sort of history repeating itself, and as we've seen in most, most revolutions.
Yeah. So, and what I learned from the Killing Fields, the movie, if you were educated, and they found out, your life was you were done. They just
Yeah,
killed people.
yeah. They would go after, when they took over, they would try to find out, okay, was your family linked to the military, police, educated? I mean, it got to the point there were, a lot of anecdotal quotes from people over the years, saying that the Khmer Rouge would execute people who wore glasses, because it was this thought that, oh, you wear glasses, you must be educated, or you must be, an intellectual. So it was really a very twisted, you know, um, human experiment, really, of what they could do and how they could kind of change things to however they saw fit.
And control, because it got to a point, well, why don't you just leave? If there was any hint that someone was going to leave, you could count on your entire family being dead, right? So
Yes,
that
correct.
kept people in place. Your poor mother, she lost all her brothers and sisters. I think there were 6 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Mom, dad, everybody, including little kids, were
Right.
just murdered. How did your mom manage to stay alive? I know your mom came from a very stable, wealthy family. Everything was
Mm-hmm.
great. Same with your
Yeah.
dad, right? Your dad
Mm-hmm.
had a successful had a family business. So
Mm-hmm.
both your parents had a great, wonderful life. They went from that to being literally slaves. But
Mm-hmm.
how tell us how your mom made it through.
So really, based on what my parents had told me, I mean, it was really the art of deception. It's really was the name of the game, because if they found out who you were, of course you would be executed. And at the time, when things were sort of at its height of atrocity, there were people that were starving, and you couldn't trust that, if you told someone who you really were, they might go and, tell the authorities who you really were in exchange for food. Because, we're talking about survival mode for people. So for my mother, it was deception to avoid being recognized or identified as being a member of her family, which her father was a provincial governor, and they were, so they were politically connected, and they also had wealth. Um, and it was the same with my father. So by them ending up in the same labor camp, one of the things that helped fuel kind of aid in that deception was the fact that, my father marries my mother, and now she's, you know she can kind of hide under another layer of a different identity, as being, not who she was before, but now just as
Different last names. So
different last
they
name.
were married before everything happened, or
They got married sort of during this time, which is known as the Killing Fields. So they, and again, when we say they were married, I mean, it was not like there was a ceremony or anything. It was just, you would tell the local authorities, okay, this is my wife, right? And there's no records, so they just take it as is.
got it. So if she had used her maiden name, she would have
Right.
that wouldn't have gone well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. So your parents are okay. So then they get married during that time, and what did it? So they end up. How'd they end up in the same labor? They kept a married couple. I would assume they separated a lot of people just by luck. They end up in the same labor camp.
Yeah. So before they, ended up together, married together, they were just in the same labor camp.
Oh,
They
okay.
didn't know each other before.
They didn't.
So they did not know each other before. They ended
So
up in
they
this.
met in the labor camp.
Correct. They were assigned, I guess, to the same work group.
So she makes it. So this is after her whole family was killed.
Yes.
Why did she not get killed?
So when she's she's made this escape from the execution that of course happened to the rest of her family. She's able to sneak out with, at the time she has a daughter at the time, which is from a previous marriage,
Got
right?
it. Okay.
And that the father of her daughter, my older stepsister, he's already passed away, and she's able to escape with her sister and her daughter, and because essentially what you're dealing with are this group of radicals that they're not a very it's not a very educated uh force. It's people that are disenfranchised for various reasons, and they're just taking commands from someone higher up. So when you walk into a labor camp and you make up a false name, nobody knows that it's not, unless someone recognizes you and can turn you in. So she's going by a false name at the time, her mother's maiden name, and same with her sister, and she's traveling with a young child. So they're not able to, for whatever reason, whatever whatever you want to call it, luck, stars aligning, she's able to to avoid being identified, and so
How
that's
long
how
of a
she's
how long of a that's unbelievable. How long of a process was that from everything, them coming in and just pushing everybody out, to making it to that labor camp? Is this a 1 week, a 1 month? Everyone's killed. She ends up in this labor camp. Your dad ends up in that labor camp. How long was that between arriving to the labor camp? How did that work?
it's a very, for all intents and purposes, a very fast process, right? So the war ends officially. The Khmer Rouge have defeated the democratic government, and they start marching. The Khmer Rouge march on the capital city, and all the major cities. And as soon as they arrive, it's pretty much, all right, everyone, get out, at gunpoint. They're forcing everybody out. And there's scenes like you'll see from some of the movies that have been made, like The Killing Fields is one. There's a few others that have come out in recent years, but there's scenes where you see everyone being forced out of the cities, right? Just mass exodus. And this total process is probably a couple months when you're talking about it, because it's not pack your things. It's just grab what you can that you think you'll need to survive. And of course, at this time, nobody really knows what's going on. They just know they're being told to leave the city. So some people are bringing everything, and some people are bringing just what they think is the bare necessities. So it's over a matter of probably a couple of months that you're emptying out cities of millions and millions of people. So by all accounts, you think about today when you go to if you go to a sporting event or a music concert, and you think about, oh, how long does it take to get through this line? Now imagine on a scale of taking a city of millions of people and emptying it in a matter of weeks. So probably a couple months at most, to empty everyone out into the countryside.
All right. So they're living a free society, a great life, and then this faction comes to power, and then they just push everybody out, and life changes. They end up in a labor camp. So, and your mom meets your dad in labor camp.
Mm-hmm.
So how long were they in the labor? They were slaves. I mean, and I the one thing I read about your dad was like, it comes to a point where all you think about is how can I get food? All he thought about was eating, because they were literally, people were dying from starvation. They were dying from disease. And not to mention they were dying just because they were being executed
Right.
for looking at somebody the wrong way, or whatever. Things that are, it's not comprehensible what happened. That's why it's not imaginable that any human could think of treating humans this way. But it happened. And that's why I think it's important to talk about it. And I think the story, the inspirational part is that your parents made it. But let's continue the story. So how did how long were they how long were they slaves? How long were they in labor camp?
So they're in labor camps for a couple of years
Oh,
before they were able to make it out. So if you can picture, not even being, in the 1% here in America, just being an average middle class family, and then losing everything you have, probably being separated, because that's what happened to a lot of families, and that's the sort of the downstream effects for the culture of Cambodia and the society, is that we've all, families were separated, so you don't know who's still alive, who's not, where they are, um, and then you go from probably what our biggest issue is today, right? As we're all, we all work from home and dealing with the pandemic, is, is the Wi-Fi going to hold out, right? So we can continue to do our work. Well, now you're worried about, are you going to eat? And that's something that most of us, in the United States will never experience. Um, but yeah, that's something that comes crashing down as a stark reality for them.
so 2 years in the labor camp, the things that they must have witnessed, also not really conceivable how you get by that. I know in the article your parents have since passed. We'll talk but about their lives in America in a little bit too. But the nightmares, the things that just just the not just the physical torture they endured, but the mental
Hmm.
things that they saw, um, not comprehensible. But 2 years in there, and then so the Khmer Rouge, they get knocked out, right? The North
Hmm.
Vietnamese come in and take care of them, which isn't
Yep.
the greatest thing either, right? But it's better than. So what happens? What happens there?
Yeah, so the politics of the region come into play there, where the Khmer Rouge, is a communist government. The North at this now this is just one country, Vietnam, after the
Yeah.
war, right? They've unified, but they are also communist. But it's to the point where the two sides aren't seeing eye to eye anymore. So the Vietnamese make their push, um, and they do drive the Khmer Rouge, out. Of course, there's still factional fighting, things like that. So now it's another war between the North Vietnamese, the Vietnamese and the Khmer Rouge, and that continues for many many years. But that causes enough instability, which allows my parents the opportunity to make their move, which is to make a break for, the border with Thailand.
Well, the Vietnamese said, "You guys can go back to your homes now," and your parents were like, "That's probably not a good idea. Number one, there's nothing there, and they didn't
Hmm.
trust the communists." I mean, I know you had saw the podcast we had with Stephen Trong, a refugee
Hmm.
from Vietnam. His parents, and they took their family. They escaped. Uh, in fact, they were the last plane out of Vietnam. But I think your parents, if I have it right from reading that story, they're like, yeah, no, let's get out. Let's figure out a way out of this whole thing and start all over. Hopefully, if they can make it. It wasn't easy. Then they
Right.
ran into more trouble. Can you take us to? So they went for Thailand, but that wasn't things didn't work out so great in that
Yeah.
situation.
When you think about this escape, right? It's not it's escape by foot. So you're working, in these labor camps during the day, and your only time to try to escape is at night. So, and as I said, these these guards, or groups that are sort of monitoring these and overseeing these labor camps, they don't have records or things like that, so you can show up the next day in another camp, and no one's really questioning, like, where did you come from? um, so that's how they're doing it. They're kind of, hopping from camp to camp to make their way to the border, um, and traveling at night. And so that was, of course, difficult. The terrain of Cambodia is tropical. So you have a lot of, forest, rainforest, things like that you have to go through. certainly all the dangers of the wilderness, and certainly not being prepared for it. Right? You see, people going on expeditions, but they have tons of gear. I mean, you just have the clothes on your back. So they're trying to make their way there, and of course, there's you know always the fear of being caught because there are patrols, out at night. And of course, anyone that is in a position, when you're starving, when you're desperate, they find out and they think they can maybe get some more food. They might tell, their local, uh, you know, their local authorities that, these people have escaped, you know, and then that's it. So a very perilous time through the jungle, but also a little bit more difficult for my mother because she was pregnant with me at the time. So that, you know, uh, is probably something that I think people that would listen or watch this podcast, if any of them have ever carried a child, now probably are thinking to themselves, "Holy cow! Like doing that through all this is pretty incredible."
There was one point, I don't know where they were at the time. I read in the article, I think it was your dad was saying they knew they were about to die. They thought for sure this is it because they're on like a cliff or something. And people, it was one of those situations where somebody turned somebody in and they were just and somehow
There
they
was
made it
definitely,
through.
yeah, there was one time, I think was in the article, and I know my parents had shared with me was they had made it to the border, but they were turned away.
Yep.
And so they were turned away at the border, um, and that's how it was back then. It was, all of these refugee groups are just trying to cross every day, and of course, the Red Cross is there, and the aid groups in Thailand, and they're taking in whoever they can, but of course there's a limit. And so every day there's refugees that make it, and there's also ones that are turned away, and you just kind of keep trying until it's your turn, um, to get in. So they're turned away at one point, and they were all put on a truck, I guess, and driven a few miles back, and then ordered. And the story I've been told is they were, ordered at gunpoint, everyone get out, and go back. And my father recounted the story about how they start walking, and it wasn't too long after they weren't too far away from the trucks when the first landmine went off.
Oh,
And
that's right. I read that. Yeah.
so they had been dropped, in this area where and Cambodia is one of the most heavily mined countries in the world, and certainly, like, you hear about Afghanistan, and countries like that, and Cambodia is up there too. There's just landmines, um, are very prolific in Cambodia. So they have to march through this minefield. And my mother was pregnant with me at the time. So it's my father, um, his niece, my mother, who's pregnant with me, her daughter at the time, right? My older sister. And, and we're marching across this minefield. And it's one of those things, like, somehow nobody in my family stepped on a mine. Um, you know, um, don't know how.
Yeah, I read where your father was saying it's about a 5-minute walk, but took about 5 or 6 hours
Right.
because like he would lead the way
Right.
and then
And you
tell
try to
everyone
walk
what's
in the
yeah.
footsteps of the person in front of you so that you know that it's safe. And it's one of those things that I don't think anybody could ever comprehend until you've gone through it. I mean, I've tried to imagine it for myself, and I just can't imagine knowing that every step could be the last one.
So somehow they make it through there. So how did they end up as refugees in the United States? How did they end up in Buffalo?
So when they finally did make it to the camp, my father was educated. He had a college degree, so he spoke French and English. And because of his ability to speak English, he was very useful to the aid groups that ran the camps. He could communicate with the workers, and he could translate, and communicate with the other refugees. So he was put in charge of a lot of tasks around the camp, and he got to know some of these director level people very well, and because of that, we were fortunate that they were able to secure the ability for my family to leave. And how we ended up in Buffalo. So my father was told by one of the directors of this camp. He said, "You know what? I was able to secure 2 spots. You have to choose. One is in the United States, and one is in New Zealand." So my father picks the United States, but at the time he didn't know it was Buffalo. So, and of course, even if they told him, he wouldn't have known,
Right.
what's Buffalo, New York,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So, we're getting ready and everything, and sort of, it's one of these things like he's not asking a lot of questions, right? My father's not like, well, where in the United States are you going to send us? Like, he's like, listen, anywhere but here is going to be,
Yeah.
the way my family is going to survive. So, as I guess they're getting closer to the departure date, because you have to fill out, I think that highlights something that is interesting that a lot of people don't realize about the refugee experience. My family came to the United States already in debt, because you have to fill out forms where basically there's promissory notes. So the United States purchased airline tickets for all of us to come to the United States, but it's a promissory note. My father signing it saying, "I will pay back the United States government in the amount of," and I believe at the time it was like $3,000 US, for the cost of these flights. So, as the paperwork is being done to get everything in order, he's told, this opportunity to go to the United States is through a sponsorship with a church in Buffalo, New York, right? And that's the first he's hearing about Buffalo, New York. So we were sponsored by a church here in Buffalo, Evangel Assembly of God, and that's how that all got started.
So they end up in Buffalo. You grew up in Williamsville or Amherst? Amherst?
Grew up in Amherst, and then
Okay.
moved to Williamsville, when I was probably about 10 years old.
So they start over and they're successful. I mean, it's crazy. It's like so I want to get to one, I want to talk about humanity, and you know what? Let's get right to humanity. And I want to talk about what they did. Ooh, did they talk to you about their belief in human beings? I mean, I would think a lot of people would be that have gone through what your parents went through would not believe in human. Is there a humanity? I mean, what did they talk about?
My parents were always people that, despite everything they went through, always believed in the good in people. I think a lot of that was fueled by the fact, number one, I think just from a cultural perspective, um, people who visit Cambodia and travel to Cambodia will often come away saying that they feel like, in general, the culture is a friendly one. So I think that's kind of the base level of it. And I think you'll find that for most of the Southeast Asian countries, a lot of people say, in general, the people are very, you know, very amicable. And then, they come to the United States, sponsored by a church. And, so we spend time attending church. My parents converted from Buddhism to Christianity. So, there was a lot, obviously, of the Christian teachings for, um, the good in humanity, and the good that you can do as a member of this, of a society. So I think that had a lot to do with it. But there were also other um, examples my father gave me, and examples I experienced with my mother, that just showed the humanity that, despite everything, right, despite losing everything, despite losing their loved ones, they still were, it somehow, and I don't know how, to be honest with you, I don't know how they didn't walk away jaded. I don't know how they didn't walk away not trusting anyone ever again. But they did. I mean, my father, uh, he told the story of when we first came to this country. We were sponsored by the church, and my father, and proudly, my father will say he was never, even from the time he arrived here, my father never was on any government, welfare program or benefits or anything. It was always, self-sufficiency, have to be able to do this for yourself. Um, and he told me the story about how the arrangement with the church was that like every week he was supposed to get some sort of, like a $25, allowance or something, the church would give to the family, for basic needs or whatever. And I guess whoever it was at the church didn't always remember to give him the money. And I was like, well, Dad, did you ever like call him and say, hey, I need this for my family? And he said, no, no, no. That's just not me. I would never, like, if they gave it to me, great. If they didn't, then, we found another way. And my mom was the same way. My mom was extremely, she was a giving person, a loving person. I told the story actually, at her funeral. I told the story about how when I was very young, I used to take the bus with her downtown. She did a lot of, my parents did a lot of work with the refugee um, aid organizations here in Buffalo, like Journey's End and Catholic Charities, things like that. So I used to take the bus with my mom a lot downtown. And there was one time when we were getting on the bus and there was a man standing at the bus stop and he was asking for money. And we got on the bus and then my mom got up and then she asked the driver to wait. She went outside and she gave a couple bucks to the guy at the bus stop. And she came back on and I was like, I was probably, I don't know, 8 years old at the time, maybe a little younger. I was like, Mom, why did you give that man, our money? Like knowing as a child, like knowing we don't have a lot. And she said, and I still remember her words. She said, you know what? There'll always be another dollar, but we may never have another chance to help that man. So, that's just who my parents were. And again, despite everything, I don't know how they were able to not walk away with it feeling like, humanity was something that they had lost faith in.
It just says, what special people they were to go through what they went through and still believe, as you said, that there is good in people. I mean, they watched a lot of people get murdered. They went through things that are not imaginable.
Hmm.
And then to come on, I guess, they were extremely appreciative that there were actually people to help them. They
Absolutely.
helped them get to America, help them save their own, have a life for you, have
Hmm.
a life for their children, not just themselves. So I suppose that's what led them to believe in humanity. But it's got to be they just have to be special people to be able to come out of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what did they do when they got here? What were they had to? You said your dad was self-sustainable. What did they do?
So my dad was, as I mentioned before, he was college educated. He had a degree in hotel and restaurant management. He actually did spend time during his studies um, as a foreign exchange student in Canada. So he comes from this background of service and hospitality, but when the Khmer Rouge took over and just kind of destroyed that infrastructure, now you're a college graduate with no way to verify you actually have a college degree. So, at that point he's thinking, okay, again, he's still in survival mode of how do I make a life for my family here? So he gets a job at a local machinery company, and sort of this thing where he starts out working there, sweeping the floors, and eventually gets to know the owner pretty well, and the owner's like, you know what, we're going to help you get trained and certified as a machinist, tool and die maker. So that's what he ends up doing for, for his life here, in Buffalo and in the United States. My mom, because again, she came from a educated and wealthy background, had some, you know, more opportunities in her life previously. So, for a time she was a flight attendant in Cambodia. And so she spoke, French, English, and Cambodian. And so, she's able to use that when she comes here to the United States, working with these refugee communities, helping to translate and things like that. And then eventually she gets a job as a teacher's aide in the Buffalo school system, because the Buffalo schools have a very large ESL program. So she goes to work as, Bennett, and Grover, and helping out around there until she finally kind of lands a permanent spot at School 45, which today, I believe is still known as the International School, where a lot of the refugees today, from Burma, Somalia, et cetera, are those children go to school there. So that's sort of her legacy, is she spent a lot of time as a teacher's aide there at School 45. And that's how the two of them, went to work and created a life for all of us.
It is just an amazing story. That's where I say it's inspirational. Their persistence, their will to live, and their will to provide for their family. Um, that it's the ultimate, right? So
Mhm.
they were in their probably their early 30s when they got out of there and made it here. So they spent, maybe 20, 25 years here.
Mhm.
But they both died young after all of that. They both die young. Your dad passes away at age 62 in '05.
Mhm.
He had liver cancer, I believe.
Yeah. Yep. Correct.
And then your mom at 57 from a heart condition back in 2010. But this is where your story, you get involved in this story too now, because of your mom passing at such an early age. You're like, you decided you should really have your heart checked,
Yeah.
and they discover something, and is, it's saved you from
Yeah.
an untimely end. So why don't you tell us about it? You're 41 now,
Yep.
healthy, but tell us that situation.
Yeah. So back in 2011, I'm diagnosed because of the passing of my mom. Uh, I go and see a cardiologist who, does we do the EKG, and he says, everything looks okay, but you have this family history. Your mom was so young. I think you need to go see a specialist, and specifically an electrophysiologist. So electrophysiologists are physicians who specialize in the rhythms and pacing of the heart, and diseases related to that. So I go and see a local electrophysiologist here who does another EKG, but slightly differently. And then I'm informed, we're suspicious that you have this condition known as Brugada Syndrome. Pretty rare condition. But for Brugada, the thing is that most people don't discover it until it's too late. Most people that have Brugada, they have the one event, the one major cardiac event, and that's usually the event that kills them. So I catch it before anything can happen, and then they tell me, okay, you're going to need an implantable cardiac defibrillator. Now, at the time I'm 30 years old, and I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be something else, right? Got to be drugs, got to be something, some other therapy for this. And my doctor's like, no, this is what we have at the right now. You know, this disease that you have is only about 20 years old, and in a medical timeline, that's not very long for them to know what it is and how to treat it. So, this is what we have. This is the option for you. So, I go in, I get this, I have this implanted cardiac defibrillator now, and and you can't really walk away from something like that without stopping and saying, okay, this is a life-changing moment for me. Um, how am I going to live going forward? How am I going to make sure that, you know, I take advantage of this, and that this is, that my mother passing away wasn't for nothing. So um, that's when I decided to start steering myself personally and professionally towards medical devices, because knowing that this one is going to save my life, and how this is going to make sure that I'll be able to see my kids grow up, and enjoy all of those things.
So you get into interesting. Your health condition, which you discover because of your mother's unfortunate early death. Uh, so now you just recently, and you're a father of three,
Hmm.
and so now you recently um, hook up with a company, Medtronic, which is they deal in medical devices, but specifically you're working with cardiac rhythm, heart failure division. I
Hmm.
know you're early on in this particular point of your career here, um, but how cool is that? That's pretty cool. That's directly affects you, and yet you're going to be involved in it
Yeah, and it's really a story of a very serendipitous story, if you will. Um, Even before this new adventure I'm going on, in clinical sales, is hooking up and working alongside a company that a lot of Buffalonians will remember, which is Greatbatch Medical, which is now uh, Integer, but Greatbatch being very famous in Western New York for being the product of Wilson Greatbatch, um, who developed the first implantable pacemaker. So going and working alongside those incredible people there, and then eventually going and working for them. So working with them as a vendor, but then going and working with them as a direct associate, and really seeing the things that they do there, right? So they make the components for devices like mine. They make batteries and capacitors and leads and guide wires and all kinds of these components that are then sold under the retail brands like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, you know, Abbott, etc. Um, so that's where I have this unique insight into, I see what goes on to make these devices. I see the people that have dedicated their careers to developing and making these devices to make the lives of patients like myself that much better. um, and it's a really incredible thing to think about, because most of us will never see where anything we buy or purchase is made. um, you know s- so specifically for me, I've been able to see you know where my battery was made. um, and that's a really special moment for you when you see that and you realize, like, I'm standing at the station where the battery that is one day gonna save my life was made. um, it really is surreal. It's one of those things where you really try to make sure that you take it all in and you appreciate it for what it is, because you're in a very, very special position.
I think you also have, I can't speak for you, but maybe you have, you look at this as, wow, this is so cool. I get to, I feel much more comfortable with this because someday I'm going to need it. I don't know when it is, but it's going to save me when it happens. And that would give anyone a different look at life and appreciation for life. But I also think a lot of people would have a different look at that. Would be like, this sucks for me. Why do I have to have this? And my gosh, this is, I don't know it would be a negative look. But I'm wondering if you have more you're more positive about things just because of who brought you up and who brought you into this world are two people that witnessed and lived in hell
Hmm.
and made it through and were positive. It's
Right.
got to rub off on you.
It absolutely does, and you can't go through that and grow up in a family like mine and grow up to become unappreciative of everything that you have, every opportunity you've been given, to have a life and make a life that you choose, it really is something that, I have to say, like, I don't go through any day and feel like, I even the bad days, here could never compare to what I know my parents went through. So, we all have our bad days, at work or personally, and you know, at those times you may feel like things are really bad, but you really do come away. For my situation, you come away with this idea that you catch yourself, you allow yourself that time to kind of to grieve or to be angry or whatever it is, because you don't want to deny yourself that, but you quickly, I quickly pivot and focus back on getting back on track, because um, just knowing what everything my parents had gone through, that whatever it is I'm going through right now just doesn't compare.
It's great perspective. Can you tell me? I don't know if you know the answer to this, or maybe it's just from your personal. Obviously there's a lot of going on. This time of this recording, September of 2020, we've got COVID, we've got some racial unrest in America, we've got an interesting election certainly coming up. I'm trying to think of positions. There's a lot of, you know, what did your parents think of the United States of America?
They definitely always believed that it was exactly what it was sold as, that there are opportunities for everyone. It might not always be exactly what you want, at the time, but there's always an opportunity. And really, I think what my father always instilled in me is that you have to take advantage of the opportunities that are presented for you and sort of make your own luck, if you will. Um, but the United States is still that place that anybody can, as long as you have the right mindset and the right, you have the ability and you have the hustle, you can make it into whatever you want. It's really, it truly is up to you. And for my parents, I think they looked at it as they weren't given the opportunity. Like for my father, he was college educated, which was very rare for Cambodia because it's a third world country. So when you talk about people who are educated in places like that, they're the top of the class. They work very hard, and it's a big deal. Whereas in the United States, I think a lot of people don't appreciate that you have the opportunity to go to school. You could be the C student and you're still going to college. For my father, he had to be the top of the class for most of his life just to be able to go. And we're not even, he's not a doctor, right? He went to school for hotel and restaurant management, which is what he wanted to do. But in order to do that, he had to be at the top of the class. And then he's raising children here and seeing like, wow, like, I didn't graduate at the top of my class, but I still had every opportunity. And so to them, that was still a really amazing thing. And they were very grateful for it, that that the opportunities existed for their children. Certainly there are things that they would have wanted to turn out differently in life, but they also knew that it wasn't, it's not always up to you. My father was a man of great faith, um, and when he converted to Christianity, I mean, it really, drove a lot of what he did every day in his mindset. Um, so there was never, they never looked at it as, well, it's not as great as we thought it would be, or what we had, grown up hearing about it. I mean, they were always all in on America.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, we just forget um, how fortunate we are to be in this country.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not perfect. It's got a lot of issues, right?
Sure.
Every society, every country, we all do. But I think a lot of times we just forget that, and stories like your parents and yours help us to say, you know what, we got to, we can all work together. We always have for over 200 years. Get through any situation. This is a great place to be. Let's make the best of it. And to a great point is you have to uh, take advantage of opportunity. That's
Mhm.
certainly what your parents did. It's what you're doing. Um, I appreciate it. I appreciate you giving us this time, Lang. Went way over the time that I told you it would take to do it, but such an interesting and inspiring and yet at the same time sad story. Um, 3 kids, you're in Buffalo, healthy, good for you. I wish you luck in everything. I hope you and I can stay connected, stay in touch, and I wish you luck in everything, you and your family.
I appreciate that, Steve, and I really want to say I'm honored that you've asked me to speak and be a part of this, because I think what you are doing there, and highlighting the fact that it's all about people, is something that we should never lose. As a society, it is all about people, and it's about our stories, and that's how we connect with one another. So that's something that I really appreciate that you're doing.
Well, thank you, Lang. You're right on. People connect with people, and even in the business world, we're a marketing company, and what we've come to realize is, people talk about branding and building brands, and that's so true.
Mm,
But in small businesses, people don't connect with the business; they connect with the people behind the business, because that's what humans do, and we all do it through
that's right.
storytelling. So, thanks for recognizing that. Again, thanks for the time. Thank you for sharing your parents' story and your story. That's Leng Ung. Thanks again for helping us out. You can you can watch any of our podcasts by visiting our website, shoveltosidewalk.com. If you have a story that you think needs to be shared, or you know somebody that has a story that should be shared, something, whether it's inspirational, educational, informational, whatever it is, um, fill out a little form on the website. We'll contact you and we'll help share your story. So thanks again to Lang Ung for sharing his story and his parents' amazing story. Thank you for participating. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. This has been Sidewalk Talk. I'm Steve Fortunato.